This is the Dark Moon Greatsword, currently one of the best weapons in the game for an intelligence build. Pairing this impressive and powerful sword with spell versatility, you now have an insane damage dealer build that can one-shot mobs, take them one by one from a distance, or take down a bunch with AoE spells. Take a big chunk of health of every boss from afar, slow them down, and finish them off with the Dark Moon skill, and let you come ahead in every fight situation with a diverse offensive. The Dark Moon Greatsword with this build has it all, and if you want a build that does not have any flaws in PvE, this is the one for you. So let's check out the Greatsword, armaments, and attributes you need to make it happen. Game on!
Quick shout out to our sponsor, AOE.com. If you don't have the time to grind for runes or items in Elden Ring and need them real fast, use my code BAL for 3% off.
The Dark Moon Greatsword is not a great physical damage greatsword. In fact, it is the worst greatsword in that regard. But what it lacks in physical damage, it excels in magic damage and a superb skill called Moonlight Greatsword that does an incredible long-reach magic damage. In patch 1.7, Moonlight Greatsword was buffed, reducing the stamina consumption for strong and charge attack, meaning that the skill can be used more times until the stamina is depleted. And the second buff or modification was that added damage detection to the weapon part. That means that if you use the skill close enough to the enemy in sword distance, you will do also sword damage as well. The Dark Moon Greatsword can be found after making a significant progress in Ranni's quest, right after defeating Aster, Natural Born of the Void boss, and giving Ranni the Dark Moon Ring below the Cathedral of Manus Celis in Liurna of the Lakes. After giving the ring, a short cutscene will play and the sword will spawn in the floor short after. The Greatsword at max level has a frost buildup of 55 that can be insignificant because you won't be dealing much normal attacks with the sword anyways. And honestly, the build will revolve around the skill and frost damage spells to be a complete frozen cosplay. The main damage dealer is the skill Moonlight Greatsword. Its mechanic is different from other weapon arts. When used, you buff the weapon, imbuing it with frost, increasing magic attacks, and then any charged strong attack will release a blast of moonlight with great reach. The buff will last 60 seconds and you will spend 32 FP on that initial buff. Then each blast will only use stamina, so you can blast as much as you want on those 60 seconds if you have the stamina for that. So as you can see, it makes sense to create a frost late game build around this skill, and this is the way I play it. Against mobs you dispose of great versatility, you can use Moonlight Greatsword skill to one-shot them, Loretta's Great Bow if you are looking for more reach on a single shot, Glintstone Ice Crack when you want to stay mobile and do a normal or charged cast, some more Ice Storm or Adula's Moonblade spell for crowd control or swarming enemies. And if all this is not enough, you can still use the Greatsword swings that will do less damage than the skill or the spells, but it's still an option for you. For bosses and challenging fight is when it gets interesting, and it could be seen like a build within the build, but you will see what I mean in just a few. First, what I do is when the boss is stationary or walks slowly to you, cast Terra Magica into the ground for a big buff in magic damage, then pop your Wondrous Physick Flask for extra magic damage, and no FP consumption on what I consider my spell openers. So if the enemy is still far, cast one Ranni's Dark Moon at the boss to deal magic damage and build Frostbite, and also reduce the target's magic negation that will make you hit harder with the Moonlight Greatsword skill. But if you still have a distance between you and the enemy, pop another Ranni's Dark Moon for extra damage, and hopefully you will have proc the Frostbite by then. Now if you want even more damage done by the weapon skill, before you start using it, you will need to use a Jellyfish shield buff. This last step is optional and it feels like it could be a build on itself, but more damage doesn't hurt, right? Just have to practice all the inventory change and the button pressing. On much faster bosses or the ones that launches directly at you, you could get away with only one Terra Magica, with maybe just one Ranni's Dark Moon, or only the Jellyfish shield buff, or no buff at all. It really depends on how the boss works and how much you want to risk casting the opening spells against a quick boss. Guys, if you found this build interesting or helpful so far, please help the channel by clicking that like button to get this to more people. And if you have not subscribed, you are welcome to do so you won't miss any of my new videos. Thank you so much for your support. The primary attributes of this build are intelligence and strength. Intelligence is the most important one because it is the main requirement of the Dark Moon Greatsword and the skill damage. On a max level Greatsword will scale B with intelligence. Also the main requirement of the Carrion Regal Scepter staff that I'm using on this build. The other needed attribute is Strength, just because the Dark Moon Greatsword also scales with a D, and don't forget about Vigor because you always need it so you don't get one-shotted by bosses in late game. The character I'm using is a Rebirth Vagabond, so a few of the attributes that I'm not using might differ from you if you're using a different class. If you're creating this build from the beginning, you can start selecting a Prisoner, Astrologer, or a Wretch. Since this is a late game build, I'm going only to show the attributes you need when you're level 125 and above. If you are lower than that and 125, you will want to play at the beginning like a strength build or entirely as an intelligence build or mage. But then at mid game, put more points into intelligence to get into the higher subcaps. I have a high strength attribute number, and it could be a waste of attributes if you're not playing at all doing damage with weapon swings. So if that's your case, you want to put less points into strength and direct them into more mind or endurance. So if you're level 125, your attributes might look like this: Vigor at 40 to reach the first soft cap, Mind at 25, Endurance at 22, Strength at 27, Dexterity at 14 because it's a requirement of the Jellyfish Shield, Intelligence at 60 to reach that soft cap and be able to use the most heavy requirement item, and that is the Carrion Regal Scepter, Faith at 9, no points here ever, and Arcane at 7, no points here ever. Now if you're level 150, you want your points to look like this: Vigor at 50, Mind at 25, Endurance at 25, Strength at 29, Dexterity at 14, Intelligence at 70, Faith at 9, and Arcane at 7. On a level 200 character like mine, you want your points to look like this: Vigor at 60 to get to that second soft cap, Mind at 26. I don't really need it that much of mine because all my spells are support spells and I'm using more of the Moonlight Greatsword skill, which uses a fair little amount of FP for 60 seconds. But if you want to use more spells, I guess you can remove points from Strength and place them here. Endurance at 28, Strength at 55 to reach that second soft cap and, like I said before, be able to do more damage with the Greatsword swings. Dexterity at 14, Intelligence at 80, reaching the final sorcery scaling soft cap, Faith at 9, and Arcane at 7. Now let's take a look at the armaments of this build. I won't show the location of each item, instead I'm going to link them down in the description below. So the main weapon is the Dark Moon Greatsword like I mentioned before, and in the offhand I'm using the Carrion Regal Scepter specifically because it will boost full moon sorceries like the Rani's Dark Moon spell that I'm using as an opener, and it's a good staff when you're at 80 intelligence. You could use instead the Lusat Glintstone staff to have more spell damage, but that 50% increase in FP cost won't work with this build because then you will need more points in mind, and honestly I wanted to cosplay as a frozen build, so this staff matches perfectly. One thing to note is that on magic resistant enemies that the spells and skill will do less damage, but the only boss that had so much magic negation that I had to use a different spell, a physical one like the Rock Sling, and what better staff to boost it than the Meteorite staff, so get it and keep it close just for the magic resistant bosses. Next is the Jellyfish Shield that is completely optional if you want to increase your damage up a notch with the Contagious Fury skill that will increase all damage by 20% for 30 seconds. I used it just before starting to unload Moonlight Greatsword skill on enemies. For the armor, I was really disappointed because there wasn't any heavy or mid armor that had that blue hue or color to cosplay that frozen build that I wanted, but I think that the Fingerprint armor set did a great job. It's comprised of helm, the armor, gauntlets, and greaves. If you want to do 10% more damage with the spells on this build but look ugly as shit, you can use the Snow Witch hat. Ugly. The talismans of this build are somewhat interchangeable depending if you're missing one or two, but the main objective was to increase the Moonlight Greatsword skill and the magic damage to stack with the spell and Physick Flask buffs. The first one is Shard of Alexander that will increase the attack power of Moonlight Greatsword skill by 15%. Next is the Godfrey Icon Talisman that will increase by 15% the attack power of charged spells and skills, and being Moonlight Greatsword a charged skill, it will increase its damage. It's sad that it won't buff Rani's Dark Moon spell because it looks like it's a charged spell, but it isn't. Next is the Magic Scorpion Charm that will increase magic damage by 12%. That means Moonlight Greatsword skill and spell damage, but it will increase physical damage taken by 10%. If you don't have this talisman because you haven't got far into the Preceptor Celibus questline, or is it too late and the guy's already dead, There's an option that I used and it was really good, and that's Graven Mass Talisman that increases potency of spells by 8%, or even use the lesser version, and that's the Graven School Talisman that will increase the potency of spells by 4%. Finally, I'm using Ritual Sword Talisman that will increase attack power by 10%, and since the build attacks are made from a distance, you won't get damage as much like a melee or a close combat build, especially at the beginning of a boss fight that will require this buff when casting the opening spells. If you don't feel comfortable with this talisman, you can use Primal Glintstone Blade to reduce spell FP consumption while reducing your HP. Now, to help with the magic damage buff stack and with the initial spell casting when fighting a boss, you need to use the Magic Shrouding Crack tier that will increase magic attacks by 20% and last 3 minutes, and will stack with the Magic Scorpion Charm and the Terra Magica spell. Next is the Cerulean Hidden tier that will change all FP usage to 0 for 15 seconds. So those 15 seconds is where you want to use your Ranni's Dark Moon as a spell opener to leave you FP pool intact, saving it for more Moonlight Greatsword buffs or spells if you need them in the fight. So remember that this is a frozen type of build, so the majority of the spells you're going to see are frozen type or similar. First we got Terra Magica that will create a circle symbol area on the ground, buffing magic attacks by 35% and last 30 seconds. You want to stay inside when casting the opening spell for a boss fight, or even when using the Moonlight Greatsword skill. Stacks with Magic Scorpion Charm Talisman and the Magic Shrouding Crack tier. Next is Ranni's Dark Moon that will create a small cold moon that launches slowly at the enemy with a great reach. It deals magic damage but also frostbite buildup, and if you apply it, it can make the enemy move slower, which is an advantage for you to have more time to cast a second one while opening the fight. In patch 1.7, the FP consumption was decreased from 62 to 57, so make the spells a little bit cheaper to use, so yay for us. Also reduces the target magic negation by 10%, and if you manage to trigger frostbite, will reduce the damage negation further by 20%, so around 30% in total. And that's a huge part of the damage dealing at the beginning of the fight when you start launching those Moonlight Greatsword magic projectiles. Next is Loretta's Great Bow that will work as a long range spell. I know we have Ranni's Dark Moon, but the FP cost with this one is greatly reduced, so if you need to snipe something or finish it off in a distance, use this spell. Remember to charge it for additional damage and the buff that Godfrey icon gives. In patch 1.7, the FP consumption was decreased from 28 to 24, so make the spells a little bit cheaper to use, so yay for us again. Next, we move into the Mob spell. I use Glintstone Ice Crack to dispatch mobs at mid-range and stay mobile. It applies frostbite buildup that was increased in patch 1.7 from 80 to 100, but the damage is so great that probably you will kill them first. Next is Samurai Storm that will create a freezing tornado dealing magic damage all around you, inflicting frostbite. This spell was buffed in patch 1.7, increasing the frostbite from 50 to 80, and the FP consumption reduced from 22 to 17. This is one of the 2 spells you can use for crowd control. The next one is Adula's Moonblade that will cast a frozen sword and slash it forward. It's very similar to the Moonlight Greatsword skill and has a very good horizontal spread and reach, so you can take out several enemies at the same time. And again, this spell was buffed in 1.7, increasing the amount of frostbite buildup applied to a guarding enemy, and FP consumption reduced from 26 to 22. After playing a full playthrough with this build, I honestly have to say that the Dark Moon Greatsword is one of the best weapons in the game. The skill is so dominant that it's unfair to enemies, and on top of that, the versatility of spells that Intelligence Build bring to the table is the cherry on the top of the cake. You will have a great offensive option for every type of situation against mobs and bosses. Long range, mid range, short range, AoE attacks, you name it. The only problem that I had in this entire game and playthrough was fighting against magic resistant boss. Yeah, I'm talking about you, Renala. But again, Intelligence has so much options that adding a physical spell with the appropriate stat did the job. So if you're still doubting about trying an Intelligence build because you only use Strength build or melee or dual katanas, whatever, because you immediately think that you are going to be squishy, then this build you have to try it on, period. I won't say no more. Guys, if you enjoyed this video and if you love and play with the Dark Moon Greatsword, do you think it's one of the best weapons out there? Please comment down below your thoughts, and also don't forget to hit that like button to help this video to get more people, and it will help the channel a lot. And consider subscribing if you don't want to miss new build videos like this. I really appreciate you all for your support. If you want more OP builds viable for 1.7, click at any of the 2 builds at the right side of your screen that will make your playtime fun and super easy. As always guys, be safe and see you on the next one. Ciao!